Dave, Mayur, thank you very much for joining the AWS for Data Show. Dave, let me start with you. Can you explain what is your role at Jaja Finance?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me, Sandy. My role is I'm the CEO of Jaja Finance. I've been the CEO for the last 4 years. Jaja Finance is a credit card provider where our goal is to become the UK's top digital lender. My background is I'm a experienced financial services leader, and I've been working with fintechs over the last 10 years. And in coming into the company, the goal was to transform it and build a great infrastructure to prepare it for scaling. So in doing that, we've got 2 products out in the market. We've got our own branded card, the Jaja Vanta card, but also we've got a partnership with Asda, providing the Asda Money credit card as well.
Nice. So finance industry is a really exciting space in terms of data, AI, and generative AI. And I'm pretty sure that we will have really insightful discussion today in this podcast. Thank you for joining. Mayur, you are an AI/ML specialist at AWS. Can you explain to our viewers what is your role as an AI/ML specialist?
Sure, Sandy. Like you mentioned, I'm an AI and machine learning specialist, which means I spend a lot of time with our strategic customers, help them accelerate on their journey, both with traditional AI as well as with generative AI, share best practices with them, help them realize value from their AI implementation, even catalog some of the repeatable use cases. For some verticals like financial service, there is this additional regulatory burden around compliance. So I also help share some of the compliance features of the services that we offer.
It's funny how you mentioned AI as traditional AI after the advent of generative AI. So how does your workload seem like? Like, what is the split between AI, traditional AI, and generative AI?
Yeah. Let me start by saying that traditional AI is still going strong. Where you need deterministic output, traditional AI still has a lot of application. Generative AI is very good in complementing that through a conversational interface, either for a search or for a chat or for document processing and so on. In terms of workload though, generative AI is probably 150% of my workload right now.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm pretty sure over the last 18, 20 months, your role has changed a lot, and we'll touch upon that, on how it has evolved and what you're thinking about the future. But Dave, coming back to you, let's start talking about the business, right? So Jaja Finance, what business problems do you solve? Who is the audience that you solve the problem for?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it's about providing credit to consumers. So I'd say the 2 biggest areas that we focus on is, number one, how do we cast the widest net that we can in terms of being able to provide credit to as many consumers as possible, and data, using many different data sources and using machine learning models is our method to try to do that the best that we can. So that's one area. The other area is, how do we provide the best service to our customers? So the first path that we take on that is through digital self-serve capability delivered through our app. So that requires us to provide real-time data into the app so that our customers can see what's going on with their credit cards, but also communicate back to us anything that they need. But when those times of trying to do self-serve are not working, we also provide chat capability through the app. And that's where we use our AIRI service, which is our generative AI agent that we use using Anthropic's Claude 3 Sonnet service.
Nice. So I can use a Jaja Finance credit card. Mm-hmm. Is that how it works? So that means that you will store mine and a lot of other customers' data, credit card information.
Yep.
So I'm really interested to dive later on how you manage security and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. We'll be really interested to cover that as well. You mentioned AIRI and generative AI. There's no surprise that generative AI is bringing massive transformation across all industries. And what we observe across customers is it needs a culture and mindset shift as well. What have you been seeing in your organization in terms of the transformation through generative AI, wherever the touch points are that you are addressing, and how you are addressing the culture and mindset shift?
Yeah, I think once you get started, once you get the company and you've got your first use case and you've got your first project, it really is an eye opener for many people across the organization, employees across the organization, in terms of what is possible. Everyone hears about generative AI in the news, but they don't really see how it directly translates into their work. For us, we saw an obvious use case, which is we're scaling really fast, so we're not going to have the ability, or we don't really want to hire tons and tons of human agents to be able to service those customers. So we had to find a way to be able to provide that service through the online chat and to be able to answer customer queries in an efficient and fast way. So that's what drove us to investigate using generative AI to be able to respond to those queries. So we did a lot of research, got a lot of help, got a lot of advice from AWS as well about what path should we take. And we ended up with, I'd say, how many people start with generative AI, and we used a retrieval augmented generation strategy, and we created our QA pairs that we fed into Kendra, and that's how we started to see how effectively the AI agent would be able to respond to customer queries. It's been a great journey watching how the customers interact with it, and we tell them, we're very straight and upfront with them and saying, hey, this is an AI agent.
Right.
That usually changes their behavior, and they like to send like one-line questions, and then that, of course, is not optimal if they do that. So we try to encourage them to give kind of broader questions to be able to do that. But the trick is what's the best way to design that interface? But it's really important we built a system so that we could see real time how those conversations were happening and how the chats were going. And we continued to refine it, provide better QA pairs so that the AI would be able to provide better and better answers over time. So it's been a great evolutionary stage. We've gotten to about 20% of our I'd say regular queries being managed by the agent effectively now, with customers being satisfied. The service is available 24/7, which is amazing, and the response time is incredible, especially since we've moved to Claude 3, and we'll see what happens when we move to Claude 3.5.
And that's interesting, and that also thing switching back to the internal organizational dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as you invest more as a leader in generative AI, how do you see the team dynamics changing? Because they work more with, especially the teams which are closer to working with generative AI, or either providing the service or building that service, right? What do you see? How do you see the future of these workers changing in terms of working in teams or hybrid model? How is generative AI changing stuff within your organization?
Yeah, I'd say there's, again, two big ways. One is when the core of generative AI is it's a multi-purpose usable tool for so many things, and so many people are trying to figure out what are those best use cases now for themselves. It's a pretty fundamental shift if you can figure out how to use it properly. I think my analogy is when you go back to the days when spreadsheets were invented, or it's that kind of thing where there will be a transformational change potentially if you figure out how to use the tool well. So generative AI now, part of it is it's so accessible. It's much more accessible, and when we kind of made a decision to kind of go with generative AI, it's part of the reasons are because it's actually relatively easy to implement, and it's relatively smooth in terms of what it provides as a service, and it's very cost effective as well. So once people kind of see the potential, it is about figuring out, well, I've got this capability now. How should I use it to try to change the way that I work today? That's one aspect, but it also opens up a whole set of other capabilities, possibilities in terms of how we design services and design products. And so the hard part for us now is there's just so many possible use cases, and it's about prioritizing them. And it's just, you try. I think that's one of the things, is you just got to keep trying and see what makes sense and what works. And just knowing that it's going to be an iterative process is good. It's a good approach, and you just kind of learn as you go.
Mayur, I'm interested to understand from you, as you are working with a lot of customers on generative AI use cases, what are you seeing in terms of their, so customers who are successfully moving generative AI applications to production. What are the differentiators between them and the others who are experimenting and maybe, not able to push forward to production yet?
Yeah, I would say it boils down to maybe three main areas. One is a top-down vision. It has to begin from the top. I've seen most successful organizations where the executives get it. They understand the transformative impact and they push their organization to do more with this new technology, because let's not get it wrong, the technology is still fairly new. It's evolving very fast. So executive visioning helps. The second is having a culture of innovation. If you're doing all proof of concept POCs and all your POCs are being successful, then maybe you are doing something wrong. There needs to be a culture of innovation where you fail, but you learn from those failures. If you're succeeding all the time, that means some of the failures are swept under the carpet or into the cupboard. And the third one, to the point that you raised, Sandy, is around data foundation. So thinking that the large language models can work in isolation is looking at the tip of the iceberg and mistaking it for the whole iceberg. Because the LLM, the large language model that I have access to, everybody else up and down the street has access to exactly the same data. That is not the differentiator. The differentiator is you have the right data foundations in place, so you can marry the large language model with your data. So you can customize the inputs and the outputs. Now, the method may vary. You can use prompt engineering, you can use RAG, you can use fine tuning. But having the right data foundations, having cleansed data, having the right access controls, having the right mindset to build data literacy within the organization, I think that is the third biggest differentiator.
Customers who want to start building their data foundation ground up and then investing in generative AI, it might take a long time. So what are you doing with customers who are probably not that mature with data, but still want to invest in generative AI and build those applications? Is there a way of, doing that in parallel? What are your suggestions in those cases?
Yeah, I would say absolutely to the point you mentioned. It's not an either or thing. You need to do A and then you need to B. So it is not sequential. Part of it is literacy, having your teams know what is possible, building the right use cases. That does not depend on the availability of data today. Experimenting, so you can start there. The other part is this is one of the areas where perfect is the enemy of the good. So if you are waiting for the perfect data mesh or the perfect data as a product or the perfect data lake, data warehouse, that will not happen. The larger the enterprise, the bigger the tech debt, the bigger the data debt. So you start where you are ready, where you are more ready. And the third part also is, I have seen some companies, they treat data as a liability, something that needs to be managed. Data needs to be cost controlled. I think a large part of it is not the technology challenge of building the right data foundation. It is the mindset where you go from treating data as an asset. It's like your family jewels or your crown jewel. If you manage it correctly, it will drive a lot of value. Now, I come from an oil and gas world. So I used to work for oil and gas. It's like you have crude oil, but it will only generate value when you refine it. And you can make diesel and petrol and you can make polymers out of it. It's the same with data. Once you have that mindset shift, your teams start understanding data better. So data literacy is a byproduct of the process of treating data like an asset. When you do that, you automatically will marry your use cases. You will see where your data can add value to your existing use cases. So you don't need to do big bang, let's fix all my data foundations today. And once it is all fixed, I will go and I'll start doing the generative AI use cases. That is one aspect of it. The other is not every use case that comes out of generative AI will be transformational. There will be some things which are plain commodity, which are just doing things better, which are not specific to your company, your ethos. There, I wouldn't build it. I would buy the best tools that offers generative AI capabilities under the hood. And then there are things which I feel would transform my enterprise, my startup, my digital native company for the better, where I need to use when I need to bring in my data. And that is where data foundations make a difference.
One of the important things that you mentioned is about mindset shift and culture, right? So, Dave, we talked about your culture in your organization around generative AI, but I think it will be related. But do you take any specific steps in terms of building that culture of making decisions with data?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, for our type of business, that I'd say feedback loop of kind of taking data, taking information and performance reads and how are things happening, and then kind of feeding that back is critical. So when we're kind of monitoring the performance of our products and how customers are using it, that feedback loop is fundamental. So we absolutely have that, not just in terms of monitoring the performance of the customers, but also in terms of the features and the products that we design. Is it generating the results that we were expecting? And feeding that back into our product teams, saying, we tried that, didn't change anything, they didn't seem to like it. And that feedback loop is also really important, so that as we kind of move to that, we move to the next sprint, they're prioritizing the right things to be able to generate real results that matter. So yeah, absolutely, that feedback loop is critical. And making sure we have the capability to take the data and then pull it in through either reporting or generate the insight from that, and then feed that back to the teams so that they can make good decisions. That is fundamental.
Okay. And, in terms of your team skills, data literacy is important to work with data and make decisions with data. Improving or enhancing your team skills, technical or non-technical, to be able to work with data is important as well. And have you got any mechanisms in place in your organization that look into those aspects of, let's say, data literacy?
I'd say the requirements vary based on the different types of teams. The teams that, of course, build the infrastructure have a very, there's a lot of technical skill that's required. But we also have to get information over to, I'd say, the marketing team or the commercial team, so that they can use that effectively to make good business decisions as well. So there's different requirements and different required training across the organization based on what the needs are. The key is making sure that it's available in the form that they will actually use. So we've tried a few different things, which is, well, let's try to just deliver everything in Tableau form to everybody, and a lot of people don't like that. So we needed to make sure that whoever are the kind of clients of the information, it's reaching them in a way that it actually works for them. But yeah, there's a whole different skill level required for the ones who are maintaining data integrity, making sure that the actual infrastructure is good, and when we pull the information that it's accurate, that's a whole different layer of capability that's required.
Okay, I think this is interesting, because what you're doing is providing data in a shape and form that matches the persona of their skills and experience, right? Some users might be comfortable writing SQL queries, so you provide them access to data stores where they would write SQL queries. Some are comfortable looking at visualizations, right, or dashboards, and they make decisions that way. So I think what you make sure is that the data that you provide matches the persona's expectation, so that they can easily use the data and make decisions.
Yeah, it's the use case. It's how they need to have the data so that they can use it properly. And yes, it definitely varies by different area. Even as we need to kind of publish information externally, it's got to be in a different shape and format. So it does vary. And so making sure that we've got the right information, using the right tools to the right people, so that, again, they can do their jobs. It's all about providing the information to them so they can do their jobs properly. That's the key.
Yeah. And I can see there's a lot of opportunities for generative AI playing a role in there. Like, for example, we have seen products where you can write natural language queries, right, that turn queries into SQL. So then your personas who might not be so proficient with SQL, they can write English and that converts to SQL. Or you can write natural language query on top of your dashboards, right? So you have a dashboard and you write natural language to get information from the data or the dashboard that doesn't exist on the dashboard, but can get into the data and find that information. So I think by that you basically democratize data within your organization, don't you? Because you can reach more users or personas who are comfortable using
I have to say though, it does depend, because you got to get used to it. If you're not used to using, you have to get to a point where you trust the Gen AI to actually produce the code to you. So you first have to kind of cross that barrier of trust and say, okay, actually that did generate something that makes sense to me. And then you'll get comfortable to try to use it. But I think that'll be the main issue that many people will have. Then you'll have the other camp who don't know how to do anything in SQL. They think they can just write a query and it's absolutely fine, but they need some skill though to be able to determine if that is actually what they should be using.
Absolutely. Yeah? I think we are exactly seeing this across many customers. Mayur, you might have come across as well. So customers were implementing, even for internal analysis, were implementing a chatbot or assistant, right, to help their employees to do their work. What they're seeing is that when they take it to production, the usage stats is very, there's a long tail of users who don't use it or would use it once in a month randomly, but there are just specific 10-15% of users who would use it regularly, which means that, there's a long tail of users who would need that enablement, understand how prompt engineering works to get the best result from. Are you seeing that across customers as well?
I am, and it is also in a way challenging around literacy, because the field is evolving so fast. Like I went for leave for about most probably less than a week earlier in the year, and I came back to large language models in the names of all animals and birds you can think of, the llamas and falcons that I hadn't heard of. And even now, as I think the technology keeps evolving, every time the industry faces a challenge, you would see the technology evolving, people coming up with workarounds, people coming up with solutions to some of the challenges. And I know, Dave, you talked about trust. A lot of the trust issue is also because large language models are not deterministic in their output, which means occasionally they would hallucinate. When they do, it is difficult to figure out, because they're equally confident whether the facts match the output or don't. And the industry came out with solutions, started with prompt engineering, but also including technologies like retrieval augmented generation that solves that. So there is an element of literacy, especially for executors, that is difficult because you need to keep on top of it. So there is a lot of keeping abreast with the technology. It's not a static course that I can create. Most likely by the time I create the contents of the course, it would already be outdated. But there is a second aspect, which is for lines of business executives, for CXOs, for senior leadership, to be aware of the capabilities, but also potential limitations of the challenge. And I think once we build a good understanding between the technology executioners and the decision makers on where the technology is good, where the technology is not the right answer for a particular problem, that automatically will start building trust. A lot of trust is because of lack of adequate information, which boils down to using the technology for something it is not fit for, or using it in a way it is not fit to serve.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of this, and we had this exact same question, which is when we're kind of having AIRI serve up the answers to our customers, surely hallucinations do happen. So you have to make a business decision on how do you feel about that. Is the quality of the answer good enough most of the time? Is that a sufficient level of service that you want to provide? So we took a certain call to say, you know what, we're just going to be, as we're kind of getting customers used to the service, we're going to create a mechanism that basically guarantees no hallucinations. The way we did that was we just created another AI agent to check the agents, and it worked. It worked. There's a high false positive rate that you have to kind of work through, but there's a way to do it. But it's a business decision, because that just means more of the potential queries will have to be funneled over to a human agent to evaluate. But you feel confident that whatever AIRI serves up as an answer is completely accurate. But these are going to be the interesting decisions that all businesses are going to have to make a decision. They'll have to figure out where they stand on this particular issue.
What I'm also interested to understand is, obviously, this takes huge amount of engineering effort, right? So, and working with data, what I've seen in certain organizations now is that they invest in a separate data team. Is that what you have done as well?
Yeah, we do have a data team, and you do need a what I feel is a specialist set of skills and focus to make sure that the data infrastructure is strong and consistent. What I've seen in many organizations in my history is, of course, the silos, and they're built and they're not necessarily well documented. You completely do not want this. So almost in all cases, you end up with a central data team that focuses on making sure that there's a central set of data infrastructure. It's well documented, it's well managed, and it's efficient. There are very few cases where I would not recommend that. But yes, absolutely, we focus on having a dedicated data team.
Oh, that makes sense. So the second pillar is quality. Generative AI hallucinates, right? So, and especially in your business, it's really important to give the correct information to the customers. What steps? I think you mentioned earlier a bit about it, like how you do it.
It was a learning experience for all of us, so we kind of went through them all. So we went through it, and we try to find before we scaled. So we were managing at a controlled level, 10%, so that we could actually monitor every single case to see what was going on. So that helped us understand a benchmark of what the performance and quality of the answers that were coming through were. And then we could actually try to dissect them one by one, saying, where did they get that from? Where did AIRI figure that out from? We go to the source set of information. In the beginning, we started with a broad source, right? And I don't know if everybody does it this way, but we're like, okay, let's just give it all of our procedures. Let's give it all of the historical chats that we've ever processed. And I don't think this is a good way to do it. And so what we did, because also the thing is, if you do it that way, it's hard to figure out exactly what made it happen. So we slowly, broke it down and did it piece by piece to figure out what were the potential drivers. So what did really help is that it was, again, providing clarity to AIRI, saying, AIRI, by the way, this is a good answer. So you give it examples saying this is good. And by the way, if you give the customer this kind of answer, it's really, really bad. So this is something that you have to tell it. And that's part of the training. But we did kind of monitor from the beginning before we scaled, so that we had a good understanding of what was potentially driving hallucinations. I could go on and on about this, but some of it was actually driven by the core set of knowledge that exists. And it may not have necessarily come from the information, the data that you provided, but you have to be able to figure that out. Yeah. But anyway, it's really important it's all about trial and error. It's all about kind of reading the results and understanding it and then iterating again.
How do you ensure security guardrails are in place, especially when your employees work with data, and then your systems and processes that deal with data, move data from point A to point B to make sure that there is no breaches?
I'd say there's two big areas. One is, of course, a dedicated security team, which puts together the procedures and controls access and makes sure that only information is provided to areas that require it. So that's having that kind of central control around data security is critical. The other part is the data privacy laws that we have to comply with. So we went with a tool that I'd say guarantees that we remove all PII information from anything that is kind of where it's absolutely not necessary. It's all completely removed. Now, that was part of our process and decision for some of the tools that we chose, was we needed to make sure that it was done and there was no risk associated with that. So there is the downside to not getting this right is too high. So we invest heavily in the teams and the capability to ensure that it's under control. And also, of course, compliance training. So we put everybody through training every year to say, it's really important that you do this. This is why, these are the downsides. So making sure that there is that understanding and culture around the importance of keeping data, I'd say, safe is important.
Yeah. Thank you. Mayur, so across these three pillars, right, availability, quality, and security, have you got any tips and tricks for our audience in terms of what to keep in mind when starting with building AI projects?
Yeah, I would start slightly earlier, even when you are building the data foundations. And even when the data foundations are small, and to Dave's point, small is good, small is better. You're starting in these areas and then you build. You start small, but even when you're starting small, you think lineage. What will be my data lineage? You think scale. How will I scale? You think privacy, compliance, security on the data foundation side, and you think how will my data be consumed? So you think data consumption. Part of what that has changed, so all these used to exist. Part of that has changed is think how data will be consumed by AI, including traditional and generative AI. So you start on the data foundation side. The second part is because the technology is evolving, I don't think there is a choice but to make your architecture more composable. And that includes, from a generative AI standpoint, speaking selfishly, making sure your application is as decoupled from the underlying model. Like when I started interacting with Dave and with Sarah, we were on Claude 2. By the time we're having this podcast, we are on Claude 3. We're already talking or thinking about how do we get to Claude 3.5. So the way the technology is evolving, choice is important. There will be changes, which is why making your architecture as composable as possible, that makes a change. And that makes a difference in how much of technical debt you can avoid. And the last part that I probably think of is building the right guardrails or using features that provide the guardrails. Some cases you want any PII information to be blocked even before entering a large language model. Sometimes you just want it masked. Sometimes you would want it redacted. You still want the prompt to go through, but you want the information redacted. So there are different layers depending on what kind of information you are dealing with. It could be PII, it could be financial information. There could be certain topics you want to completely avoid. Like one of the biggest concerns, I have financial services companies coming and saying, I put a generative AI chatbot in, somebody asks for what is perceived as investment advice. I want to avoid even going there. I don't want to even be perceived as giving advice. The challenge is these large language models, they are like those naive kids. You give them any question, they will try their earnest best to answer, whether it is within their scope or not. So how do you build the guardrails? How do you build content filters? How do you build topic filters that would avoid certain topics or areas that you don't want to talk about, including thinking about bad actors who would not want to do it unintentionally, who would want to intentionally jailbreak the system. So you think about that even as you're building the data foundations, then you're building your LLM architecture, and when you're using the right features that will avoid getting into that challenge in the first place downstream.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you. I think we have covered the data strategy piece in terms of availability, security, quality, building the right culture and mindset, right, and experimentation and innovation in data and AI. Another part that I see customers work on is in evolving their business processes and using data to understand what to evolve, what feature to introduce, how are customers using our products, right, for example, and getting that data, understanding your customer better to make decisions with your product or service is really important for organizations. I wanted to kind of dive deep into like, how do you use data insights to improve your processes, right? And if you can give me an example, that'll be really good.
Yeah, I mean, Airy was a perfect example when we went live with it. And it's very similar to what I was talking about last time, which is the general guidance that we received was throw everything into the knowledge base and see what happens. And then we saw the results and it was not quite what we wanted. and also so we had to change the knowledge base to better allow AIRI to perform better in terms of giving the answers back. The other one was learning about what do your customers actually want to ask you, and then gearing our responses to them. And so we saw that. We saw what they were coming through, and we had actually designed it so that we would see them with a very small lag. Basically, within minutes, we'd see the actual chat transcripts coming through, which was great. That's as good as you can get in terms of real-time feedback on conversations that you're having with your customers, looking at it centrally. So on that basis, we changed the not only, I'd say, the what was in the knowledge base to be able to address that. We also had to put in those guardrails that you talk about, because we saw that as well. So we took all of that, and and when we were rolling out, of course, we were doing this every day. Every day we would look and see what was changing. So we've evolved since then, and we've rolled it out, and it's in full production across the whole customer base now. So it's different now. But back then, it was a real-time loop that we would look at every day, and we'd say, okay, is it big enough that we want to make a change today? But making sure that you're kind of ready for that, and you want that real-time feedback loop to be able to make the change. That's what worked for us. And I think it was actually relatively easy to kind of implement this across with AWS, and that was what was good. And even when we did the upgrade to Claude 3, that was not bad at all, shockingly. I was surprised how seamless it was. But it's important. Again, if you've got that, everybody's really keen to see it, because it's like real customer information too, saying, okay, did it work? Did it make it better? Are we still getting these kind of weird requests? Or are our customers responding, or are our responses strange? Like when customers would write in and say, hi. And then there are a whole bunch of different ways that you could react to them saying hi. And so looking at those things and working through how your customers like to interact with you is key. So yes, absolutely.
Interesting. So you've kind of built a mechanism to grab customer interactions in real time, analyze that, and make decisions. Okay, this works, this doesn't work. Or maybe this is a bad example, this is a good example, and make decisions to feed back into the system to improve that system.
Yeah, right? But it's important to start small, though. Yeah. If you start like big, then it's very hard to figure out exactly what might be driving it, and to kind of fish through the knowledge base to see what it could be that's kind of driving it, or where you need to provide clarification.
And specifically when you work on AIML projects with customers, right? What kind of data points that you use that to make the best decision? What should be the next step, or what should be the next feature, for example, that you should develop for this customer? Is there any? Does that come across in your role? Like, do you use data in your day-to-day job with customers to drive AIML projects?
It's a two-way street. So a lot of the time it would be the customer coming saying, look, this is the feedback we are getting, and are there best practices? Are there learnings from other financial services, other non-financial services industries that have encountered a similar problem and they need a similar solution?
Right.
And that is more best practice sharing. But the point you are raising is, do we get customer data to feedback on what features they would build? I don't personally advise, but I know we have organizations like the prototyping team, like the GenAI Innovation Center, that work very closely with our customers to help create almost like a repository of high priority, high value use cases for the customers, where are they repeatedly getting data insights and helping them build those features, build those use cases.
I also wanted to get into the technology side of things, right? The data AIML and generative AI space is, it's kind of crowded with tools and services. When you embark on a project, or you need to probably choose a new technology or a new tool or service to build something, what is the rationale that you follow in terms of choosing this kind of?
Absolutely. So number one, will the tool answer or solve the problem that we're looking for. So let's assume that I have a few different options in terms of the way that it solves the problem. The one that best solves the problem is always the preferable one. But in addition, we'll look at ease of implementation. That will matter. And then usability. Usability is important, and then cost as well. So all of these, I'd say, factor in terms of how you make that ultimate decision. So, and again, in the case of AIRI, making the decision to roll out using Claude 3 in the AWS infrastructure, again, ease of implementation was very good. The cost structure was very good. And with future implementations where on Sonnet, we could test out Haiku. So there's other options to try to manage the cost. And we've already got a well-established usage of and relationship with AWS. So from that perspective, and Claude 3 in terms of the quality of the response that it provides to customers was also very strong. So all of these combined said, this is a good answer for us. That's how, for instance, we chose this path for AIRI.
Nice. So features, functions, usability, cost.
Ease of implementation.
Yeah.
It matters. Yeah.
Mayur, can you so when you work with customers, I'm pretty sure we get it a lot, right? So we advise customers on different services because we have got a lot of services. What is your take on helping customers decide on which technologies to go with or which services or tools to go with?
Good question. So my first point of entry is a buy versus a build. So if the customer has a need that is not differentiated, that is an industry standard need or a function standard need, and there is a tool that helps them achieve that, most often than not, it makes sense for them to buy it. If they fall to a place where the tool doesn't do what they need and they need to customize the tool, then we fall back to the build option if the customization starts increasing more than 30% of the total functionality needed. The other part is when you're trying to build a differentiator for yourself, it could be the best customer service in the credit card industry. We want to have the highest window of coverage, a 24/7 window of coverage, for example, or you want to do something internal to the business, very differentiated, generating insights. Then you start building because then you've created a moat for yourself as a business. The other part, looking down from the strategic impact, I am a big fan of design thinking, is what you're building has to be desirable by the customers. It needs to be feasible with the technology, and it needs to be viable with the costs or the budget. So there has to be an element of what is the benefit, can we quantify the benefit and the costs of adding up. The third part is what is the existing technology stack. A lot of the decision is dictated by the existing technology stack. What you build, what feature you use, ideally it should slot right in with your existing stack. If you're having one stack here and then you're creating another silo of information there, and then you're probably going to run an overnight batch to transfer information from there to here, you're going in the wrong direction. You're creating debt for yourself in the future that you will trip it. And then everything else that Dave mentioned, the usability aspect, the guardrails, but also some of the compliance features, because for financial services, compliance matters. There are guidelines from the FCA, there are guidelines from the PRA, there are standards that financial services need to follow. So an element of compliance with the regulations. And lastly is the cost of exit. So when you build something, you insert it in. Ideally, it goes as part of a large platform. You don't experiment with the platform. The platform is where you use proven and tested solution. You experiment on the use cases, experiment on trying something new. The platform should see as minimal changes as you can. So when you're going to build something on the platform side, build tried and tested that slots right in, that you will change meaningfully only after a period of time. When you're building something specific for a use case, there is a new toy, you want to test it, you can. That is specific to the use case. A new feature that you can build in a new piece of innovation like RAG, that then you can build back into the platform. That is where you drive the innovation, and almost everything else around ease of use. You mentioned the skills of the employees in the company. You don't want to use a technology that you need to train people on. Ideally, it should be something which complements what they already know. I think I've covered that, covers most of the points.
Dave, so I think this data AI, generative AI in the finance industry is an evolving space, right? So there's a lot of innovation happening. How are you positioning Jaja Finance for the future? All right, and how do you see your role changing with the evolution of generative AI, specifically in the finance industry?
Yeah, I think it ties back to something that you said, which was you kind of have to be, you have to show executive sponsorship for the desire to embrace the capability and see what it can do. So that's a big part of, I think, what the leadership and the executive need to do. Then it's how do you kind of work through that and help prioritize, help people understand what are the biggest impacting use cases for us to prioritize. In financial services in particular, I think when kind of seeing consumer feedback on where they think working with AI makes a lot of sense, and they would say, hey, that's great that you're doing it. There's two areas that I think that are evolving. One is fraud. If you're fighting fraud, they completely get why you're going to do whatever you're going to do on the AI front, because they understand fraud is bad. It's bad for everybody. So they're very comfortable with that. And there's a lot of good applications for that. The other one is consumers just have too much information nowadays. So as much as it's a very kind of careful space you need to enter, they do kind of want advice. And so how do you deal with that, where you got to make sure that you're kind of presenting it in a way, and you got to be careful in terms of how it's doing, but consumers do want help. They have way too much information. They don't know necessarily how to interpret the information. And so that kind of guidance to help them, whatever their financial goals are, they are going to be seeking that. So trying to figure out how to do that effectively is kind of, because it's, as you said, non-determinate in terms of what they may recommend. It's definitely an interesting piece of work to try and solve. But consumers definitely need help. And we see that in comparison websites are a good example. People just need to go there because it's just so much work to go and see all the possible options. Things like comparison websites help you do that, to say, okay, here's a summary of all the options. These look good, these look bad. And so you feel better. Consumers want to feel that they're informed enough to make not a terrible decision. They're not afraid that they're not making the best decision. They're just afraid of making a really bad decision. So the more that we can help consumers based on looking at their financial information, do some kind of guiding safely, that I think is an evolving improvement space that could definitely take off in financial services.
Oh, right. Okay, that's interesting. So like providing more information to the consumers so that consumers feel informed. If you can use data and AI to do that, that's an interesting space to work on, you suggest?
Yeah, if you can get it right. It's not easy though.
Yeah.
So it's not, so that's something that hasn't been solved incredibly well as far as I can tell. I haven't seen an incredible good solution to that. But if you can help consumers, like they analyze, yes, okay, you have access to all their information on how they spend their money, and you can say, hey, by the way, you spend 50% more than the average person on, I don't know, McDonald's, or something, then it's like, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that. So it's helping customers understand their information, and especially if to help them benchmark against other larger data sets, that would be incredibly useful. Anyway, that's a potential, opportunity.
That's interesting. Thank you very much. Mayur, I know you shared a lot of nuggets of information. Our viewers have access to an AIML specialist who work with customers all the time on advising customers, data strategy, AI, and machine learning. If you had to summarize everything and give some last comments on what should customers think about first when they embark on building generative AI applications. If you can provide some advice or advisory on that, that would be great.
I like the power of three, so I'm probably going to summarize everything into 3 points. The first one is, when you think of generative AI, don't think of only the LLM, start thinking about your data foundation. I think that is primary. That is the only way you can differentiate yourself. LLMs are not the differentiator. Your data is your differentiator. The second one I would say is prepare to experiment. Learn from where things don't work on how they would improve. If you want all your POCs to succeed, then maybe generative AI is not the right technology. You need to learn, you need to adapt, you need to experiment, and then you need to build. To Dave's point, start small, learn, build literacy, adapt, and then acquire new use cases within what you've already built. And that builds a very convincing proposition. And third one is, don't get me wrong, generative AI is fantastic technology. It will not going to solve global hunger. So it shouldn't be generative AI is the answer. Now, what is the question? There are some areas where generative AI would be fantastic. There are some areas where you need deterministic output, where traditional AI would do just as well. And there are areas where you would, after analyzing the problem, realize that you can go by just by doing proper insights of the analytics that you have. So horses for courses, find the right solution for the right problem. Don't start with the solution and then try and define the problem around it. That would pretty much be my advice.
As an AIML specialist, especially with generative AI, how do you see your role? Well, it has already changed, I guess, in the past 20 months, but how has it changed and how do you think it will keep changing?
I think for one, it has been overwhelming because the sheer number of conversations I've had in the last 18 months, I probably did not have as many in the 5 years before or 6 years before. So it has been overwhelming. It's also been very humbling as an experience because I am a specialist, but then it's humbling to know there are so many things that I'm not aware of. I'm learning about transformer architectures, encoding, decoding. When I thought I'm done with that, then we came to vector databases and embedding models, and I knew some of it, and then there was a lot of it to learn new about chunking strategies and so on. And when I thought we've done that, and then we came to the world where we're talking about RAG and we're talking about agentic conversation. So there is a lot of learning that has happened. So it's been a bit of a humbling and a bit of a learning experience. But to be a specialist to my customers, I need to feel as a specialist myself, which means going back a lot about learning, and it doesn't end. So because the technology is evolving so rapidly, like Claude 3.5 came out, I'm yet to go. I need to find time and test it to be credible, to make sense when I'm talking to my customers, when I'm talking to my partners, when I'm talking to other internal employees.
Makes sense. Thank you very much. Dave, just to wrap up the podcast, where can our viewers reach out to you personally and to the company, if you can share some information on that? And any last comments on the whole scene of data and data strategy and generative AI?
Yep, to reach us, we've got our website, www.jaja.co.uk, and people can reach me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. So in terms of what's happening, I think it's exactly what you're experiencing. It is just this explosion of new capability that is just coming so fast. It's really hard to just keep straight all the potential developments that are happening. So somehow you got to take a deep breath and figure out how you want to manage through that. So that's exactly what we did. We go from, by the time we were just launched Claude 2, Claude 3 comes out, and just as we're figuring out how to optimize on Claude 3, 3.5 has come out. So You just got to figure out what's the right rhythm to be able to do that, but just understand that it's just going to keep changing. And so, but as you said, don't try to shoehorn the tool into any possible to try to solve anything. That's not the right way. Very good. But thank you.
Thank you. And Mayur, where can customers reach out to know more about AWS for data or generative AI or AI in general?
Yeah, so customers can reach out to us on Amazon.com, and there are services listed, but you can drop down, you can look at the generative AI services, you can look at some of the use cases we have done and case studies with other customers as well, where they've implemented, where they've been successful, and use cases in industry or by specific function.
Yeah. And I think we have got customer stories, which customers always want to know what other customers are doing. And that's where we add value. And we're creating customer stories like this podcast, right? So we talked about ARI, how Dave and the team at Jaja Finance have developed this service. So I'm pretty sure our viewers will take a lot of knowledge and information from what you both have shared and implement in their organizations. That's the hope with this podcast. So thank you very much for sharing all the information and joining this podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.